Hi, everybody. Let's get everybody's attention real quick. I want to first say thanks for coming and braving the traffic that was on 99 today, and hopefully the folks that were there didn't have too much of an accident to kind of get around, but thanks for coming. One of the things I just want to say really quick is these topics we speak about on a quarterly basis. The reason we bring them up is we run into them on a regular basis when we're talking to you folks and servicing you. Myself and the consulting business and all the guys up here will do a quick job of introducing themselves and what they do, but thank you again for coming. I'll start down at the end here and just grab the mic, introduce yourself and what you do, and then we'll get into the Q&A side of things.
Hello, my name's Ed Macha, and I work at Decorum Wealth Management. My partner Andrew's with me as well. And what we do is we help manage assets for families, help with transitions, as things we want to talk about, and Sean touched on it, and I don't want to get lengthy, but we help with all financial needs of helping people with liquidity, helping people plan on different events that are going to occur in their life. We obviously will probably get some, I always in meetings like this, get some questions on a hot stock tip or something like that, but we focus on much more than just that. It's not stock trading, but working with families, helping educate them, and working with all the gentlemen that are on this board and making sure that we collaborate and are working with you and coordinating with your professionals to help make educated decisions and run it by us and go from there. So we're at Decorum Wealth Management, and then we'll keep going from there. I don't know, Sean, if this is just an intro, so I'll keep it short.
Yep, just intros, and then we'll get into some kind of direct questions and stuff after that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Maxwell Norton, and with this fancy microphone, I feel like I should be singing a song. But I'm delighted to be back in Fresno. Graduated from Fresno State. I was a farm advisor for 36 years, and I'm here as a volunteer. I volunteer with the California Farmland Trust. I'm on their board of directors. Everybody on our staff is up in the Hillmar area at an event that they're running. So, but the Farmland Trust, we work with landowners. We provide a service to them to create and take care of conservation easements on their farm. And I'll get into that more detail later.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Tim Kohl, and I am with Nationwide. I'm sure you guys could probably all sing the jingle if I asked you to, so don't do it. But I represent a program called Land as Your Legacy. It's a farm and ranch planning service that Nationwide offers to any ag family in the country. Most of you probably don't know, but Nationwide as a company was started by farmers 100 years ago. 2026 will be our 100th anniversary. And agriculture runs through the blood of this company. Started by farmers, we're still run by farmers. We have a board of 16 members. Over half of those board members are active farmers, so that is their day job. So they understand the idiosyncrasies of transitioning a farm from generation to generation. And so they started this program about 14, 15 years ago to help families out there create their own succession plan. To date, we've probably completed about 1,600 plans for families across the country. It is a program that we do not charge for, so it's complimentary. The board sees this as Nationwide's way to giving back to the community which they started with. So with that, I will kind of move it over to Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Curiel. I'm Ed's partner with Decorum Wealth Management, and our goal is to always kind of be a partner in these various transitions, working with people like the group up here or other professionals that we know to help farmers and different professionals in their life transitions as these different life events happen, and help them coordinate to get to the next stage of errors and do it the best, most tax efficient way, because no one's friend is Uncle Sam.
Hello, I'm Michael Cohen. I'm the co-founder of a company of the name of Agribusiness Succession Advisors, and we work across the country in agricultural venues, helping families transition their operations from one generation to the next, and hopefully to the next and the next and the next. And so I've been doing this for about 43 years. We do a lot of public speaking. I have clients here in the Central Valley, but convention season is coming up, and we'll We'll be down in Austin at the National Potato Conference and up in Wisconsin. And so succession planning is an issue that's often thought about but not very frequently implemented. And so thanks to Sean, I'll get the opportunity to share some thoughts on that with you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mathew Hoffman. I'm a shareholder at Baker, Manock, and Jensen. Some of you are familiar with our firm. We've been in the Valley for decades. Most of our clients are agribusiness clients. That's true of my practice as well. Describe myself as a corporate and real estate attorney primarily, serve as general counsel for all kinds of large agribusiness clients throughout the Valley. But I'm also well-versed in estate planning issues, so I'll talk to you a little bit about those today, of course. Been at Baker Manock for 30-plus years now. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon.
Thanks. So we're going to jump into a little quick. I'm going to have some Q&A. If you guys have questions after they make a comment, please raise your hand, kind of wave it strongly. I'll call on you so you can make sure you're getting your questions asked in the right order as we're talking about things. But one of the things I want to start with, and we'll kind of start at the end of the line here with Matt start, I guess. And I guess one of my things I always see is succession planning often starts a little too late. What are the biggest risks that a family face by delaying the conversation? Because communication is a big part of the problem. Nobody's communicating these things. And then what are kind of the first questions every family should ask when transferring ownership? If you want to start with that, Matt.
Yeah, a lot of different ways to answer that question, but I'll say that the biggest loss is just opportunity cost. Succession planning, estate planning typically takes place over a period of years. The longer you wait, the less flexibility you have oftentimes. Estate planning and succession planning mean a lot of different things to different people. But my observations over the years is that one of the core issues with respect to succession planning, with respect to a farm, an agribusiness of any type, is, are you raising farmers? Are your kids interested in farming? You'd be shocked. I'm often shocked how late in the game people start really asking those questions. After all, at its core, when you talk about succession planning, you have to identify your goal. And what is your goal? Is your goal to maximize the wealth transfer to your children, grandchildren? That's a good goal. That's a distinct goal from wanting your children or grandchildren to carry on, the farming or the agribusiness that you've built or started or expanded. And then, as part of that goal, family harmony, family dynamics, how passing along an active enterprise is going to impact the relationship among your children or grandchildren. Is that part of the goal? Often, surprisingly, sometimes it's not the top goal. For some people it is, for some people it isn't. So I would say, early on, very early on, you need to really, figure out what the goal is, and then get professionals like everyone up here on this panel to help you with that goal. I can tell you, I've been practicing, like I said, for 30 plus years. I do not have your succession plan in my desk. That is not something that I've prepared for you. And I say that jokingly, of course, but the point is that, a succession plan evolves through communication, collaboration, involving all the different professionals you see here up on the panel in those discussions. It involves discussing it with your kids, sometimes your grandkids, certainly your spouse, but there is no one-size-fits-all succession plan.
Thank you. Mike, let's go down the line, I think.
Matt and I have not met, but I agree with everything you said.
Thank you, Mike.
Succession planning is a process. It's not an event. It takes a lot of time to put it together. It's interesting to note that there's been studies that document why family succession fails typically within 3 generations. And it's not because the attorney made a mistake. It's not because the taxes were too great or the insurance wasn't enough or was too much. It's because of lack of communication and trust between and among the family members in this succession planning process. And so what Matt just talked about is this needs to be talked about early on. We, as part of a succession planning process, we really want to address a number of different components of the planning, which every family group within this has to have their own financial independence plan, because if somebody's going to be impoverished within this, that's a plan that's not going to work. Every family has to understand where their sources are coming from. So different than your financial independence plan, what's going to fund that? Is that these guys? Is that your farmland that you're renting back? Are you selling some assets? Whatever that is. Have you set up a charitable trust, perhaps? So many different dynamics, but starting early on this and communicating to the next generation the opportunity. So I hear frequently that, well, we don't want to do that because we're not trying to talk the kids into coming back to the farm. And I've heard this so many times, and my response is, fair enough. Have you communicated what the opportunity is, though? That's a lot different than trying to talk your kids into coming into the operation. And so what are the expectations? What does that look like? We create in many families sort of an employment policy, which is really guidelines for that next generation to come in and what they can expect. And, what happens when there's an older brother who's been working there for, 12 years and younger brother comes in and he wants the exact same income, benefits, time off, all of that of his older brother, that's probably not going to work very well. So succession planning is a process. It's got to be well documented. If it's not written, it's not a plan. I can't tell you how many times you sit down and say, what are your objectives? And, mom and dad can delineate those things. And does anybody else know this? Well, no. Well, that would be a good thing to start on. So succession planning in general, I think there's a study that came out of the University of Wisconsin, and the bottom line said they broke succession planning down into 3 things, and I actually think it was brilliant. Number 1 is, where are you now? Number 2 is, where do you want to be? And number 3 is, how do you get there? And if there's a lot to each one of those, but truly that's a great dynamic for succession planning. And if there's a first question to start with, the succession planning, I would always say, begin with the end in mind. What do you want this to look like when you're gone, when the next generation comes in? What is that supposed to look like? And if you start there, you're actually working backwards, but then you can start to define what needs to happen within your family to create a successful succession plan.
I'd like to agree with everything these gentlemen just said. It's really, but the other thing is succession planning is always an ongoing process. It's not something that ever stops. Sometimes you set a succession plan and everything is in place, but life happens, things happen. And the more that you on-go and communicate with the professionals and your family of what your family values and your goals are, you're able to make those pivots and changes when those life events do come.
So some of the biggest risks of delaying, one would be age. If your implementation of your plan requires, let's say, life insurance is based on age and health. So the older you are, right, the more limited you are. So when you're younger, you have a huge amount of solutions that are available to you. But as you get older, those solutions shrink and shrink and shrink. So age is a huge component of delaying. The other thing I would say, one of the risks of delaying is, what if you get in an accident, right? And now everything is going to be thrown. Talk about throwing a wrench into the plan, right? That's now you're not out in the field where you need to be, and maybe you've got medical expenses that you hadn't really planned on where these are coming from. So accident, age, I think those are 2 of the biggest ones.
Agricultural conservationism, and I'll call them an ACE. They are voluntary agreements allowing landowners to protect their land from non-agricultural uses sometime in the future. Most landowners sell an ACE But besides protecting the land and having an ace on the land, may minimize estate taxes and possibly reduce property taxes as well. Donating, some people want to donate a conservation easement on land that they own, and that can also result in significant federal tax savings in addition. Now, don't assume anything until you talk to a CPA. That CPA knows where you stand in terms of all that stuff. The value of an ace, in simple terms, is the difference between the land's value before and after an easement is placed on it. Landowners can still sell, lease, inherit. You can still mortgage the land. You can change crops. You can build farm-related structures, just as long as the land remains in agricultural production of some type and the water rights stay with the land. You can't put an easement on it and then sell off the water rights. It can be a useful estate planning tool for some people. Proceeds can be used to start a fund to buy out non-farming siblings, and when getting bought out, you may be able to reduce your capital gains hit. A favorite case of mine was a farm not far from Modesto, where two of the siblings had moved on to other careers, and one sibling wanted to keep the family farm. The other two siblings weren't so keen on selling out because they were afraid that somewhere down the line the farming sibling would cash in and sell it to a developer and get this big landfall that they would miss out on. So when Grandpa put an agricultural conservation easement on the place, the other two siblings all of a sudden were much more willing to be bought out because they knew the farm was going to stay in farming. And they had also a sentimental attachment to the land. Now, the process takes a year or two, so you got to plan ahead, just like everything else. If you want to get the easement to make if you want to sell an easement, for instance, what we try to do is get a grant proposal on your behalf and go through the complicated pre-submission and submission process. Now, the compelling argument for everything at this table that they've talked about is you can continue to change things over time. Almost everything you can go back and modify in some way. Agricultural conservation easement, that's forever. Forever is a long time. So you need to talk to your family members. It's not for everybody. So if you're curious about it, the brochures are on the table over there and the phone number's in the back, and somebody from the organization is happy to talk about your thing and scope it out with you.
All right. Again, my name's Ed, and there's going to be a lot of overlap, and I guess that's what happens when you take Sean's outline and put it in ChatGPT and say, answer all of the questions. And so I can tell you a little bit about each subject from my notes. But what I want to talk about and kind of add on to what they've said is for over 20 years, I've been doing this, dealing with families and farmers and seeing different things. And what I'm going to come down to is what we've kind of echoed is the 3 C's: clarity, communication, coordination. So I'm going to, because everything's different. Every situation, I've had it where I hear a lot of times, well, that next generation doesn't want to work. They're not going to do it. I don't know what I'm going to do. Do I just sell it all from, well, I'm not going to plant almonds because we're going to go row crops because I want my son to work. I don't want him just doing trees, or different subject matters that different farmers come to me with, and I've seen them have to come to ideas of, well, I'm going to sell the orchard and I'm going to buy real estate in Texas because I like Texas and there's some tax advantages, to municipal bonds. There's all of these different things, options that any one of these professionals can help kind of guide you with different ideas. Maybe there's no silver bullet, but there's a lot of ways. I know nobody in this room would like to pay taxes. There's different ways to do that and plan. And so the biggest thing for me to continue to kind of go over is start early. Again, that's been said. Communicate often, and then integrate professionals that can do it. I might not know it all, but I communicate with the family, and I know the families well, and I'm able to find the best professionals by asking the right questions or hearing the conversation or from past experiences. I know, I'm not sure, but I know there's a way maybe you can delay these taxes for 14 years if you go through this program, or you do this or you do that. Maybe we look into that. And so that's the role we'll take. But it's so communicate often, integrate professionals, start early, and begin while key decision makers are healthy. This is something I probably can't reiterate more, that a lot of people put it off. These tough conversations to have. Hey, to sell the ranch, what do you do? What are our options? So let's just do the ostrich, the head in the sand, and avoid it, and maybe it won't be a problem. But the earlier you start, I've seen mental capacity dwindle, and now the key decision makers are no longer able to express themselves the way they would have, or may have intended for things to go. Again, it was mentioned earlier, document everything. No informal promises, no handshakes. I get a lot like, well, I told my boy, or I told the neighbor down the road that he could have this section of the almonds because we've been buddy. That's fine, but make sure you document everything. So I want to go over that again. Review regularly. As we know, laws change. They're always evolving. And if you did a trust and it's dated the trust of 1992, probably things have changed within your family dynamic, within tax law, within whatever might be out there. So make sure that you work with, if it's your financial professional, your CPA, whomever it might be, your trust attorney, that you do those regular visits. And I know nobody likes to go and as soon as the clock starts, as soon as you sit down with an attorney and you have to go over these things, or you go to your CPA and it starts. Well, don't avoid those things. There's a reason that you need to do that and keep it in place. So review regularly as things change. Build liquidity. This is another thing that we will talk about through insurance, through whatever professionals you want to talk to. Liquidity is important because one of the things I read today was liquidity blind spots. And a lot of people, and I'm sure this resonates with people in this room, liquidity blind spots, you're dirt rich, but asset poor sometimes. Or not poor, but where there's not these liquidity available either from cash, or if it's through insurance policies, or however you structure that with your financial professionals, making sure you do have liquidity to execute the plans that you intend to execute. And then the last thing I'm going to end with is just to kind of reiterate everything. Start early, document clearly, and keep communication open. Coordination between the family and the trusted advisors is the difference between preserving a legacy or losing one. And so that's the importance. You guys have built this from legacies to come, and you don't want a financial decision or not poor preparation or doing that and not take advantage of that to be able to pass on this multi-generational legacy in the most efficient manner possible. So that's what we're here to kind of talk about today. So thank you.
I think one of the things, as I'm listening to everybody too, that gets forgotten when we're looking at it's a process, right? So every step of the way, it's not just getting out of the business, but like, what are my kids going to do, right? Are they going to run the thing? Is it going to be a legacy trust? Am I selling all the operation assets? And then the biggest thing, like Mike got to, is what's your end goal? Do you want to pick on somebody here in the crowd? Do you want to be on hunting reserve in Wyoming for the next 5 to 10 years? And that's your end goal? And what does that look like? What does it take? Do you want to just have a stock portfolio that sends you a check once a month for your income? Do you want to have a commercial real estate portfolio and just it's mail money, right? I always call it mail money. It just comes in the mail and just shows up on the 15th, and you wave it and you're happy and you go do your thing, and then while your successors are running the business. So it's really like it's a lifestyle choice, right? But you're also managing everybody in that chain's lifestyle. It's a life cycle, right? This deal has a life cycle, right? And it's a circle. It's always moving around. So here's the business. I'm going to get out of it. The business passed on to somebody else. They now have the same thing to deal with, right? And the best thing you can do for your family is to show them how that process works. So when their time comes, they've got a framework to work off of, right? And I've seen some families that have done a good job in transferring things over, and they're doing an even better job with transfer with their kids, right? So you're setting up a legacy here, and that's the thing I kind of ask myself. So what's your end goal? Second thing I'll get into is and yeah, I did cheat a little bit with the help of the computer system, so keeps me, because my brain goes all over the place. But we'll start with Matt again. Because this kind of walk through some common legal and tax issues you see with families that kind of pop up. Just some common stuff that's just regularly hits that people aren't expecting to see, and also maybe just some kind of new things. I know you've mentioned the IRC section 6166. Mike, you've talked about 1,000-year trusts. Just kind of some interesting things that people don't normally see in their estate planning process that kind of show you how varied it is and how important it is to have so many professionals involved in kind of looking at your process.
So as you might imagine, I could go on for 2 hours on this topic. But no one wants to hear the lawyer on the panel drone on for too long. So I'm going to kind of rapid fire some of these things. And, maybe some of the other panelists, of course, will expand on them. But in my 30 years of practice, something weird I've seen, I can hardly explain it, but I've gotten a distinct sense that farmers do not like to pay taxes. I don't know, maybe it's me, but inevitably, when I meet with a farming family and we're talking about, usually it's in the context of estate planning, could be succession planning as well. The conversation always starts with estate tax laws. How much is the government going to grab when I try to pass on my assets to my kids? It's always the starting place. So to honor that proud tradition of farmers, we'll start there. And if you're one of those farmers that likes to pay taxes, take out your phone right now, start scrolling. You can just completely zone out for the next 10 minutes or so. So the lifetime exclusion amount, many of you, I think, are probably familiar with that. The amount is currently $13.99 million. Thank Donald Trump and his big, beautiful bill. That amount is going to go to $15 million per person, effective January 1st, 2026. So that means a married couple can pass on $30 million worth of assets to their kids, grandkids, whomever, free of estate tax. And estate tax is a big tax. That's a 40% tax. That's higher than your capital gains taxes. So it's significant. And so that's the playing field that you all have right now. A couple important things I just alluded to there is since 2010, we've had portability. And what that means is that when one spouse dies, their exemption amount, that robust $15 million, which is indexed for inflation, and presumably will increase, each year after 2026, that can be used by a surviving spouse. But it doesn't happen automatically. So I know Sean has talked about pitfalls and caveats and maybe some things you guys could take away with you from this speech this afternoon. You have to file an estate tax return to claim the use of a predeceased spouse's credit. That's a huge number now. $15 million tax at 40% on that is a huge number. You cannot afford high wealth individuals cannot afford to lose the benefit of a predeceased spouse's lifetime exemption amount. And in my experience, when the first spouse dies, the surviving spouse oftentimes gets lulled into this sense that nothing's really changed, nothing to do here, nothing to see here. All the big changes happen when I pass away. Well, that's not true, and it's especially not true with that portability and the potential loss of that lifetime exclusion amount. What goes hand in hand, soon as I start talking to clients about the estate tax, their minds start drifting to, giving assets away. But there's a push and a pull because you have an income tax implication associated with death as well. Many of you are familiar with it. Some people are not. It's critical to always keep in mind there is a step up in income tax basis on death. And for you farmers who live and die through depreciation, expensing items, but in the depreciation world, all those vines, all those trees that you've heavily depreciated, you get a chance to redepreciate them on death, or your heirs will. And another caveat, pitfall there is the distinction between, California's a community property state. There's a distinction on whether you get a step up or not if that property's separate property compared to community property. So, this is another discussion I have when clients are, 10 years into a marriage. Sometimes they're super vigilant about protecting separate property character of assets. 40 years into the marriage, maybe time to rethink that separate property character for the property, because there could be income tax implications associated with that. So for those in the room, and congratulations, for you, $30 million isn't enough. Your estate exceeds $30 million. How are you ever going to pay the estate tax that's due on the portion of your estate that exceeds $30 million? You have life insurance as an option. That's been alluded to. That's an option to create liquidity. You got to be careful how you acquire that insurance. You could be, thank you, sorry. You could be, exacerbating a problem if you acquire that life insurance in the wrong way. So people typically use irrevocable trusts. You also have, Sean alluded to it, this is not something that is, in my experience, is well known by clients. The 6166 election, that's an election where when your estate's principally comprised of closely held business interests, you can pay the estate tax associated with those interests over a period of 15 years. Interest only for 5 years at the lowest interest rate anyone's ever going to offer you, and then installments over the next 10 years. So no, and I think Sean did a really good job of alluding to this, your principal problem with succession planning is normally not you are going to lose the farm because of estate taxes. That's typically not the case. There are solutions there. So, even though there's ways to pay that estate tax, should you owe that estate tax, no one wants to pay it. So what are the things that you should be doing? We've talked about planning early. And there's, two basic types of estate planning techniques to reduce estate taxes. One is just the classic estate tax freeze, freezing the value of your assets by giving them away to children, grandchildren. When you do that, any future appreciation grows in their estates, not yours. So that's kind of a freeze technique. You also have fractionalization techniques. So you probably somewhere along the line, someone has talked to you about setting up partnerships or LLCs, giving away assets, because you can give away those assets for a fraction of what you could give the assets away for if you just gave cash or even gave undivided interest in real property. So these are all techniques that are at your disposal. Again, you need to start talking to professionals. The earlier you start to implement some of these techniques, the more advantageous they are. So I'm going to stop there. Mike.
I'll step in real quick ahead of Mike too. I think a couple of things to think about too is, in talking about these things, right? And when you're giving these partial interests away over time, if you haven't had a conversation with your kids or grandkids about what they want to do as well, and you go ahead and handing them over a ranch or handing them over an asset they have no interest in at a future date, you've kind of missed the boat, right? Yeah, you got away from the taxes, but when that child or grandchild takes that asset over, and if they don't want to run it, they don't have anything to do with it, you really didn't do anything for them, right? And so it's really important aligning interests up generationally, right? Sometimes people forget about that. They make decisions kind of in a box. This is what I want to give. This is what I want to do for them. But sometimes just asking folks, like, what do you want? We had a dairy operation a number of years ago, and grandparents set it all up, hands it all over to the kid, and then get to the end of the day, and the kid wants to be a computer engineer, has no interest in the dairy whatsoever. You have $45 million dairy operation and no interest, right? And so you got to rethink everything after 10 years of going down this road. So yeah, that's kind of super important. The alignment is huge in my mind, but sorry.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right about that. And I'll real quickly, I call it, one aspect of that I call the golden grandchild syndrome. Your kids have had an opportunity to disappoint you, your grandchildren haven't. I've over the years, there's been countless times where clients will come in and they're super excited about giving away assets to their 7-year-old grandson who's as cute as can be and, loves Papa and has never done anything to make Papa upset. Unlike his father's screwed up 10 times over. But your grandson grows up, and sometimes he has more twists in his road than your son ever had. And so, yeah, that's something to keep in mind for sure.
So I mentioned that study that the number one reason why family succession fails is because of lack of trust and communication among the members. The number two reason is failure to prepare heirs. So it just speaks just exactly to this topic. So I believe in three things when we're looking at the estate side, and that is, what can we do to reduce, freeze, or eliminate these estate taxes? Everything that Matt said was perfectly accurate. But going in a little deeper on this, how do you structure entities so that you can maximize the discount that you kind of talked about, fractional interest, same kind of an issue, how to maximize the discount that may be available to the family? If you structure it one way, maybe you get a 20% discount. If you structure it another way, maybe you get a 45% discount. So what I'm talking about is that $30 million being leveraged, 20%, 30%, 40%. These are massive dollars that we could potentially be talking about in terms of moving assets out of the estate. What if your estate's so big that you have a $100 million estate? Man, 30's nice, but even with discounts, you're not going to get all the way there. Are there things you can do? Absolutely. There are things that you can do to move more assets out of your estate beyond what the credit equivalents are. So, I mean, there's lots of strategies. Within these strategies, you've got to be very careful, because you could do things such as eliminate, if you don't structure these things correctly. This is where working with a Matt would be very helpful, who knows farm and ranching operations, that you don't eliminate some of your FSA limits. And that's a big deal. You know, if you've gone in and done a bunch of planning and you know, the FSA agent has been by just an hour before, and your client's telling you, yeah, we used to have 6 limits, now we have 1. You're not going to be very popular. And so it's really important to do this. We don't work in a vacuum. We work with all these guys. We don't think that we're the sharpest tool in the shed, but we think that we're one of many that can bring really great and creative ideas to the table. Coordination is key. I was just with some people this week. I mean, this is just a very sad story where I guess bad planning had been done years ago. To unravel that, the family spent $600,000 in legal fees, and they thought, you know, at least we're behind that, and we're just asking them, and so they really haven't addressed the current family situation, and we're just talking to them about it, and they have lots of life insurance in the entity, like $15 million of life insurance in the entity. So there's this strange rule that if you don't set up life insurance appropriately, it can become income taxable. And exactly the way they had their insurance set up would cause the death benefit to be taxed at ordinary income. And we mentioned that to them. And it was like deer in the headlights. And they said, you got to be kidding. And, you know, we've just spent all this money. And I said, look, the value of somebody who does succession planning on a deep level is to really dig through all the minutia. That's not a little mistake. That's a big mistake. And so the other piece about this gifting, and this is, you know, Matt talked about, oh, can you use portability? Can you let everything go to the wife? Well, you can, but one thing there, you don't get to use the GST exemption the second time around, and that's what allows you to transfer assets for a longer period of time. The second thing is the juice in gifting is not the gifting, it's time. That's what makes gifting powerful. If you are 75 years old and you give assets to your next generation, and you've used your lifetime exemption, and you've leveraged those lifetime exemptions and used 30, and who knows, you're very fortunate you got 60 out of your estate and you died the next year. What you really got is the value of the discount out of your estate. That's it. But if you did that same gift when you were 40, because farmland in California is not growing at inflationary rates. I mean, maybe it's gone down here just recently because of the water regulations. But, you know, if you take a 6% average rate of return, assets are doubling every 12 years. If you took today as an example, just $30 million, in 12 years, that's going to be 60. In another 12 years, that's going to be 120 million. You know, looking around the room, most of you are going to be here in 24 years. The power of gifting is the time that you have to let those assets appreciate outside of your estate. Another thing is that there are states that allow you to make perpetual gifts. Everything that Matt said about the give up of the step up in basis is accurate. And so this can't be done casually. A lot of thought has to go into this. But could you imagine taking that piece of farmland that has been near and dear to your family, and you can pass that in such a way that it will not be subject to estate taxes ever again. That's possible. That's absolutely possible. We do it all the time. We have clients here in the Central Valley. They've used that strategy. They're thrilled that they have it in place, and they have given up the step up in basis knowingly because they've said, hey, we may do 1035 tax-free exchanges on this property, but we don't see that we're going to be getting out of this. And so the issue of having to pay a capital gains tax is a much smaller issue than facing a federal estate tax. So just some really interesting points around using the tax laws to the greatest possible extent. The other thing is when you have families with multiple members, you get to multiply the use of those credits and exemptions within your family, and it can make a huge difference. And please don't forget the annual gift exclusion gift. That's $20,000 per person, per beneficiary. Any one of you could go out on the street corners of Fresno and start handing out $20,000 checks, and there would be no tax to the recipient, and it's a dollar for dollar reduction of your estate. I don't suggest that you do that, but using that within your family.
If you
can be
do, I'll leave
really
my address at the
powerful thing.
back and just.
Tell me what corner.
So just a couple of interesting pieces on that.
Switch a little bit for Andrew and Ed. So say part of the succession planning is the sale of assets and liquidation of assets. Now the money's moved out of the operation, become cash, right? What are a couple quick strategies? Don't spend too much time on that people can use to say, hey, I'm moving that money into X to avoid capital gains or at least minimize capital gains taxes and have more of like an annuities type of structure right when things are going through.
I'll let Andrew take this, but recently when treasuries got to above 5%, so every farmer that's always broke, all of a sudden when the treasuries were at 5%, people came in and said, we can make interest that's safe with the treasuries at 5% for our cash, maybe have it layered at different banks. So that was just something that popped in my head of different ways with your liquidity to manage it. And then Andrew, if you want to talk about something specific that you're working on or however you want to take it from here.
Yeah. So I think, kind of like they're saying is if a liquidation event happens or finding some way to have that liquidity, something that can be done is using a stock portfolio or a stock and bond portfolio in kind of different silos. One of the big things that, everyone's concerned about with the stock market is what if it all crashes tomorrow? And so what we like to do, or Ed and I plan is when we do our financial planning, is we plan things with liquidity in mind. So we put something away that we know is not going to necessarily move. We put it in treasuries or CDs, and that's an option to put 3 or 4 or 5 years in that type safe bucket. So where the other money in the stock market grow and work for you, but peace of mind wise that money is sitting there in that safe vehicle that you guys don't have to worry about for a handful of years.
And then Tim, they've kind of looked at a little bit, maybe explain how the life insurance works, but just in case somebody doesn't know, when somebody has an event and say, hey, I've got a taxable event of $20 million, for example. I've gone through my estate, they valued it out, here's my exemptions, I've got left over, and now I've got $10 or $20 million of tax liability that I'm worried about. How would you kind of address that on the insurance side, for example?
Yeah, and I think Matt covered some of this stuff, but life insurance can be a real. It's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox, right? It's not going to be the best fit for everybody who walks in the door, but because of the tax-free nature of life insurance, typically, as Matt said, if you put it in an irrevocable life insurance trust, right, try and keep it out of the state. But what we find a lot of times is that most families have kids that do not want to farm. Right. So how do you equalize that estate? Right. It's very popular. We see that almost every case that comes in the door. We'll say one child, son or daughter, wants to continue, one does not. So how do you equalize that estate? We had a case that came into the door from us from Texas. 3 kids. First child was a son. He had been helping dad since he was little. Definitely going to be the heir. Second was a daughter. She ended up going off to school, then med school, became a dentist, wasn't practicing in the same town. And the third was a special needs child, which they had not really set up anything for. And when it came into us, it says, yeah, we just want to split this 3 ways. and we're digging into this thing, and we had to go back and say, this isn't going to work. It sounds great because we all love our kids, right? I've got 3 kids too, right? But it's not going to work when you're transitioning an operation, because your one son's going to get a third of the money to run 100% of the operation, and now he's in business with his 2 siblings that don't want to have anything to do with this operation. So ultimately, those are going to fail. So life insurance can be a way to equalize that estate. If it's in a trust and it's on the life of mom and dad and they pass away, now the son that wants, or daughter that wants to continue that operation, has a bucket of money that he can set aside for his siblings. So now he's got 100% of that operation to be able to run that. And so depending on that debt, right? We don't want to have to sell off farm assets to pay for taxes, or to pay off loans from, the ag lender, right? Life insurance can be a great tool for that. And as Michael said, it's got to be done properly, and that can be done. This is not something that can't be done. It's very easy. So it's just, again, tools in the toolbox, ways to, get you to where you need to go. I wrote down the stat. I saw this on Wednesday. I thought I'd share it with you guys. This is very important, what we're talking about today. We are losing farms left and right. We've lost 20 million acres in 5 years. It's 456 acres an hour. So we're definitely getting to a precipice, right? We need farmland. What you guys do is so important. We want to keep farmers farming and ranchers ranching, and we need that. So, it can be a tool for what you ultimately would like to see happen with your operation. And that's a very important part, right? Write that down. What would you like to see happen? Have you identified a successor? Do they want to take over the operation, right? Are they willing to do that? And have you thought about, once that happens and you pull away from the operation, do you have the means to be able to live the lifestyle you want to live? So just a few of the factors. I don't want to take all my time. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, and to give you guys an example, one of the things I see too is just the concentration of value into the older generation, right? You look at the folks in their 50s to 75 years old, and I think the top 10 to 15% of earners in the United States consume 68% of all consumption in the U.S. right now. The other 85% consume the 30%, right? You get this flip-flopping. So as the older generations, huge amount of assets, right? You're hopefully they're planning to pass them on. There's this big transfer coming, right? And one of the other examples I use too is just kind of showing this value that's in this generation too is, there's 14,000 McDonald's franchises in the United States, right? Sounds like a lot. How many private equity firms do you think there are selling to high net worth individuals and how to use their assets and move things around? 19,000, right? It's a big problem. And so the big business realizes it, right? They look at this generation, look at the asset transfer coming, and it's coming. Nobody's going to be able to avoid it. And what worries me from the farming perspective is that the folks in this generation, 55 to 75 range that haven't done this planning or don't do the planning, these PE firms are going to come and swallow you up. Consolidations keep happening, right? Part of my job, I advise for an investment bank, and one of the entire things they have me doing is looking at assets for them to swallow up and put into large portfolios. And one of those big asset targets are folks that haven't done this kind of planning, right? They know it's weak. They can come in, offer a lot of money, sweep it up, throw it in the portfolio, move forward. And so if you really want to have a legacy and push forward, it's really important to kind of follow the process that these guys are laying out. So before I get into the 2 last comments, and we're just real quick, guys, I know we all talk a lot. I always like to talk about like 1 or 2 common mistakes or common misconceptions you guys see in each of your areas that folks should be aware of or be self-aware about when they're looking at whether it's managing the wealth after the fact or once they retire. Are they looking at a conservation easement, Max? And how do they even find that thing? Life insurance, did they screw up and put the life insurance in the wrong form, or could they have done it right? That's huge. Wrong type of estate. Just real quick, and I'll start on the other end this time so we can be a little more fair. So let you start with or Max, yeah, you start and then come right down.
Common mistakes. I think the biggest thing is communication and preparation of putting it off. So that's what we see. A lot of people don't address it, and so making sure that you communicate with. And I know this is awkward for some families, but some of my families, they do an annual retreat with their family. And so they have a generational skipping trust in place, and this family has 7 children. And so every child's different. And so what they do is the dad, what was important to him was passion over paycheck. And so he wants them, that they were fortunate to have what they have, but he wants, if someone wants to be able to be a teacher because that's their passion, go teach. If they want to farm, then they can farm. If they want to, but they have to make educated decisions. So we started this family retreat, and it's over in Florida, is where unfortunately I have to go for a few days. But I'll sit and I talk with them, and they bring in the estate attorney, the CPA, myself. And we've gotten to where with the kids we'll even do mock rehearsals where somebody had to go and say they wanted to buy a van and convert it to a YouTube van so they can drive around and talk about generational skipping trusts and other families that are involved in it. And so then all of the kids had to say, like, well, what is the use? How's this, your passion? How's this? And they were grilling them. And I was at the dad in the background. I go, I would never ask this trust for any money, because they were grilling them so hard. But this creating this planning and this family dialogue and this preparation. And so that's where I see the mistake happens, is plans aren't clearly communicated and goals, and you just kind of put it off. And as we know, time goes by quickly. So my biggest thing would be communicate, create that environment where the family can have those discussions. It doesn't have to be as robust as a retreat, but making sure that you have those conversations so you know, or they know what your intentions are, and you know what their intentions are. So that would be, Sean, I would say the biggest mistake is communication and lack of early preparation.
I'll stay on the theme. Before we do a project with somebody, we ask them right out, have you really discussed this with your kids? And if your grandkids are going to be involved, have you really discussed it with them? If they haven't bought into the concept of an agricultural conservation easement, then you probably shouldn't do it, because you don't want to be in a position where you think you made a mistake 20 years from now. And it's also interesting about some people's expectations. I've talked to one, she was an aunt, kind of removed, and she said she has like 200 acres up in San Joaquin County, and she says, I want to maybe try this conservation easement thing, and I want to make it so that they can never sell the ranch, and this has to stand for farming forever. And I know darn well that there's not one of her children that wants to be a farmer. So I told her that. I said, listen, you can't manage things from the grave. You got to do the best you can, be as fair as you can with everybody. But if you're trying to do something like that, this is definitely not for you. And another thing that we really make sure people talk about is we had one person who did an easement on a beautiful place, is part cattle ground, part hay ground and almonds. And I said, well, you've only got one house on the ranch. What if somebody comes back? And she go, oh no one's coming back. And I said, well, you can't count on that. You've got a son down in L.A. Maybe he might come back someday and might want to live on the farm. If you have an easement on everything and you haven't accounted for that, then maybe you should cut out a part that's not in there that you could put. Sure enough, 10 years later, he came back and wanted to build a house on the ranch. We cut out that part. It wasn't part of the easement. Didn't have to ask for anybody's permission to do it. So once again, talk to the young kids about it.
One of the biggest mistakes or common mistakes that we see time and time again is not planning for healthcare. And what I mean by that is you might plan for the eventual effect that you're going to pass away, but you don't plan for the fact that you're going to get ill. And I know most farmers and ranchers think they're going to live to 100 and things like that. But what if you become ill? You can't, like I said earlier, be out in the field where you need to be, and you have medical expenses. Let's say a long-term care, right? I mean, in California, it could be expensive. Everybody wants to be taken care of in their house, which I would too, which is great. And there are ways that you can do that now, and you can plan for that. but you want to be able to plan for that. We see this almost every case we come in, just don't plan for that eventual healthcare illness that comes up. Quick story. I was an advisor when I had this conversation with my parents. At the time, they were about 75, which I thought I thought they were old until all my clients were in their 80s. So I said, "You guys are spring chickens." They're now in their 90s, but at that point in time, I said, "What have you guys done for long-term care purposes?" Now, I grew up in a family of 6 kids, so I was 5 of 6, and my mom's answer to me was, "Well, we just plan on you guys taking care of us, right? That's why we had 6 kids, so you could take care of us." That's not a good plan, by the way. My dad passed away a couple years ago, and that's what happened. My sisters ended up living with my mom. It was not a good situation because she hadn't taken the time to plan accordingly. Try as I must, right? Because at that point in time, it was 50%. So if you had mom and dad, right, one of them was going to make a healthcare claim. That's now gone up to 70%, right? So it's like, it's not anymore which one of you, it's almost like now both are going to make a long-term care claim. So that's one of the biggest common mistakes that we see come in time and time again. So plan for that accordingly.
That's a great point, because that's one way you bleed off your estate, right? If you get sick, you don't have long-term health care, that money's going to come from someplace and it's expensive, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think to kind of stay on theme, and it's something that we all see is one of the mistakes we common see is just not communication or lack of communication. A lot of times I hear of, the older generation telling their kid what they want them to do or expecting them to, and not actually hearing what their children or their grandchildren want to do with the farm or the land. And then you have the situation like they talked about where he wants to become a computer engineer. And then next, that farm is not, because they never really listened to them and what they wanted or what they were trying to do, and not having a real open communication, and maybe having like a family retreat, maybe a little bit much, but it gets the point across of, I want to know what the next generation wants to do and make that plan that aligns with the family values.
For me, the answer is not starting the succession planning conversation early enough. Nobody's too late to start it, and everybody in this room is certainly not too young to start it. It's important to get the conversation going and going as early as possible. And it may take a lot of time, and that's fine. The more time you spend on it, the better the outcome will be, in my experience.
Yeah, I'll build off of what Michael just said. I would characterize it this way. I see a dynamic that plays out a lot is people are waiting to make the perfect plan, the perfect estate plan, the perfect succession plan. I just got to figure out where almond prices are going to settle. I really just got to figure out where, whether Johnny's going to be a farmer or not. There's always something to figure out. That never goes away. And I always tell clients, the estate plan, succession plan is not perfect. It is the best plan we could come up with based on the facts as we know them today. That's what your planners help you with. They help you understand the salient facts and come up with the best plan. But then life happens, and that plan should evolve and it should be revisited. But just kind of this paralysis that's so easy to let grab hold of you, because there's always, one more thing to figure out before you start working on that plan.
Good. And I'll kind of sum up for everybody. I think the things I'm hearing, and we'll kind of finish up, but the things I'm hearing, the biggest issues really, I'll second them, is communication. Starting early, talking to folks, being honest, communicating also whether somebody, and I'm usually used for this, which is a great job for me in operations. But sometimes I got to sit down with siblings and kids and tell them they aren't the person that's going to run this operation going forward, because they can't. And I think you got to be brutally honest with your kids sometimes about their abilities. I have guys saying, "Hey, I'm going to hand my kid this 10,000 cow dairy operation," and he is just not the guy. Not the guy. He's going to bankrupt it in a year, right? And be honest about that. That is hard to be honest about. And everybody here I guarantee you, everybody here knows a situation like that, right? They see the kid coming up. They're not the one that's going to take it over, or all the other children are tied to that child's future, right? And so having those conversations, hard conversations, having some hard assessment of where people are at, just in ability, is huge, right? If it's going to keep moving forward. And I think the other piece too is having a number of people putting together your plan for you, because everybody up on this board and other people out there as well are going to have a unique take on what's important to make that thing successful. I'm going to come up from an economic viabilities perspective and dealing with the banks and making sure that you can make money and how do I hedge your risk and let's get the financial running, maybe instead of a board for your company to run the thing when you pass if it's not going to go directly to the kids. I have no business selecting insurance policies and how they work and making sure they're tailored correctly. I have no business drawing up a trust document and making sure the trust document's going to hit all the bells and whistles. I just have no business doing that. And so each of us here have a little piece to play in that. And it takes a team, and it takes a long time to set that team up. It's not something we're going to go out and in 2 to 3 months figure out who your team is. You need to interview people and find people not just that are capable, but are socially congruent with yourself, right? I'm a gregarious, irreverent son of a bitch. I'll tell you that right now. I am not for somebody who's super sticky and super very proper, and I'm just not that guy. You're going to hate me because I'm always making jokes. I'm having a great time, and I'm not very serious about stuff. I'm good at what I do, but that's who I am. And so you've got a couple of things. Who do you get along with? Who do your kids get along with, right? And then do they get along with the team members you're putting together? And be honest about those things. Those aren't very mathematical things, but they're very important because the team's got to be talking to each other on a regular basis, get along with each other. Because when your time to comes and you go, all of these things you've been putting in place for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years are going to start moving. And everybody on this board here is going to be basically doing their part and working with you to move that forward. The last thing I talk about, and just one of the common mistakes I find too, is not having help set up or having a real idea of how the business is going to transition if the person that's running the business day to day passes away first and the spouse that isn't involved in the day-to-day business is left over. And the worst thing you can do is leave all of the decisions to the person who's there every day but not involved in the business and doesn't really understand how things run. They're already dealing with children. They're already dealing with the loss of a spouse. So how do you transition? That's part of the succession planning. It's not just who's going to take over, but who's going to caretake this asset over and to kind of move it to the next time. So executors, people that you trust, getting them named, set up, interviewed, and deep. Have 2 or 3 of them deep, so if somebody falls apart, the other person steps in. That's a key piece, right? Who's going to take care of your family once you're gone, right? There's plenty of people out there that'll do that. It's a huge responsibility, but it's good to have that discussion up front with those people, right? If you're young and you have children and you don't have siblings out there, who's gonna take care of your kids, right? That's all part of this process, right? And so it's a really important piece. So hopefully you guys got a little something from this today. You have an idea of kind of some ideas of the partners you should be choosing and some thought processes, and then you go home and start having some really sucky conversations with people early, which is really what we're telling you to do. Go embrace the suck, go home and have that conversation with some folks, with your kids and with your siblings and people, because if you haven't had them yet, it's going to happen without you. So you might as well have them with you. So if any of the questions from the crowd or any specific things you want us to go over before we're gone, you got a lot of brain power up here if you want to take advantage of it, or grab us after this and take us aside and please ask questions away. So good.
I got a question for Matt or Michael on the end or whoever. Is you were talking about it, I'm with the Ag Center, so we were trying to find somebody to be on the board of a family who's done really well at passing on. We were trying to find another speaker, but I just couldn't think of somebody that's done that. So I guess my question to you is, Matt and Michael, anybody, is tell me what the good ones have done and the difference between the good and bads. Because I know they were all great businessmen at one time, but somebody didn't pass it on correctly. Like Sean commented on the Zackies, but I'm sure there's a common thread you've seen between something.
So I'll tell you of a client that I've been working with in Colorado in the San Luis Valley, and I mean this is just a very, very, very sad story. 3 partners in a business, and they hadn't done their succession plan or their estate planning, and we got all the way through that, and one of the owners had a younger son, early 20s, and everybody talked about him, and everybody said, man, he is not ready. And hey, but no problem, because he's young and we're healthy, and so we did all of this planning, knowing that everybody's mindset was, hey, a lot of time to groom this young man, he'll be fine. Dad died suddenly, completely unexpectedly. That son's been bought out of the business. He's no longer a part of it. He was just, he got the I'm an owner syndrome, and didn't have the knowledge and experience to actually be a leader in the company yet, created incredible dysfunction. And the other owners, they actually did all kinds of things. They brought people in, people like Sean to try to help him and train him. They really spent time and money. And they finally got to the point they said, we're doing everything we can do to help you. You're doing nothing to help yourself. We need to buy you out. So it's not that they didn't do the plan. They didn't plan early enough. And so, they all kind of talked about this, and this young man, we all thought we had the gift of time. And I think it brings up one point that we don't. We may, but we just don't know, right? And so it's an extremely sad story. The other owners, the two oldest owners, the one that died, and they played in the sandbox together. Not kidding. They were that close. They were best friends, and they thought they had just an ample amount of time. So that's where something didn't work out well. Now, having said that, do I think the plan was a success? I do, because we built into the plan contingencies. What if somebody doesn't work? What if somebody goes rogue? Seriously, it happens. Somebody loses interest in the farming operation. What do? The plan had contingencies to deal with that, but still, it's just a very, very sad story. So maybe that addresses one of the bad sides. The good side is I could tell you lots of stories, even stories of people down in the Central Valley here, where one of the key players and his wife have passed in the last several years. The operation is as successful or more successful. They didn't skip a beat. The new owners step in. The plan worked. Everybody was in agreement. Everybody knew what was going to happen the next day. Tremendous mourning, of course, but the operation didn't fail, didn't change, didn't have any disruption.
So I'll just share a story with you, and it's going to have consistent themes to what you've been hearing all afternoon. This is a client of mine, a very, very large client, vertically integrated agribusiness, huge. And I had a distinct pleasure. They invited me to what they referred to as like an annual family meeting. This happened a couple months ago. And this meeting was attended by the patriarch and the matriarch and second generation and third generation. Third generation was comprised of young men and young women, probably ranging in age from about 16 to 25. And there were over a half dozen of them. And so what I witnessed at this meeting was that, they're very intentional in terms of what they do. Number one, they clearly communicate goals to Generation 2 and now to Generation 3, what expectations are for being a part of this business, which is a large business. There's room at the table for everyone, but you're not invited just because you have the right DNA and blood. You have to, one, meet certain educational standards. Two, they work these grandchildren through every aspect of their business, so that each grandchild's experiencing a different aspect of the business each summer, and then reporting all of those experiences back to their cousins. They keep a diary, and each grandchild spoke as to what their experiences were, the pluses, the minuses, what they took away from those experiences. And then this is another one, and I'll leave it at that. They place Gen 3 in jobs with competitors and business, other businesses that are related to their businesses, both abroad and within the country. So these grandchildren are getting exposure to the businesses that are essential to the vitality of the business that they're going to inherit. So I gave them grade, an A+ grade on what I witnessed. To me, in my experience, and I've been doing this for a while, it's somewhat unique, but I thought it was awesome.
I have a question to that, just to get in a little more details with that. So let's say one of the kids is highly intelligent, CFO status, and then great kid, and then you got the other one that's not that book. Maybe he's a mechanic, but they both work very hard. So does that CFO status guy, even though he's not CFO yet, but is he getting paid the same as the mechanic because they're both my kids?
Yeah, John, great question, and it can't work that way. I think others on this panel have alluded to it. It can't work that way. But yeah. But one of the cool things, and it was maybe implied, but maybe I should just go out and say it, is by getting all the Gen 3 in the room together and forcing them to share their experiences with one another, there's a dynamic that's at play there where the cousins are seeing what the cousins are doing, what their aptitudes are, what their interests are. All of us have been doing this as long as we have. We constantly field complaints. So that guy's the golden child. He or she doesn't deserve it. They're not qualified. Oftentimes there's a level of ignorance. They just don't know the facts. So picture what this family's doing. They're putting everyone in the same room. All the cousins are listening to their cousins, and some of the cousins are like, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, that's the next CEO. But the cousins see it. They all know. There's no mysteries. There's no surprises. They're growing up shoulder to shoulder, and they're seeing kind of what their siblings and cousins are capable of, and how they're running with opportunities, and how they're pressing the business forward. And I just thought that was unique, and I wanted to share it with you all.
There's a family in the northern part of the valley. They converted their large operation to I call it a legacy trust. So it's a corporation now, and there's like 4 generations that all stock in the company. But one of the things they do with family is nobody gets a free ride. You can be an owner, but what you do for the company is you're an employee. And so if you're qualified to be CFO, you make CFO pay. You apply for the job like anybody else. If you're a mechanic, you make mechanic pay, just like the scale jobs, right? And then what they do is they take the family part of that out, which is tough, but you take it out. Hey, you want to be CEO of the company someday? You come in and you work as a field rep, and you work your way into operations, and you just like an employee would to run that company. And so they structured it in a way to get the family influence out so that the best person for the job is in. And that's one way. I think it's been a great way for them, and it's helped that company continue for many more generations. Most people expected it to. I think they're in the 6th generation of family members, 3rd generation now, not involved in the actual day-to-day operations, and they all get a dividend check every year and have a family meeting and continuity. But taking again, you don't get to be CEO just because your last name is X. It's you apply for the job, the board looks at you, you get hired on, that's a hard discussion. But again, it takes away from it. Like, what would a mechanic make? If you want to be CFO, go to school and become CFO and apply for the job, work your way into that position. So yeah.
Sean, one last thing that came to mind as we were talking and Mike was talking. I was in my early 20s, and my mentor is a very successful farmer and had been doing this a long time. And so I was coming up with a plan for him on creating a finance company that I wanted to go into. And so I was excited about it. And I loved his judgment and his any type of influence he could give me and give me some guidance. So I'm talking to him, and I'm telling him, we're going to do this. I'm going to hire this many employees. We're going to do X amount of this volume. We're going to do all of these things. This is how, and my projections in 10 years. And he looked at me, he goes, that's great, Eddie. That's good. He goes, what's your exit strategy? And I go, my exit strategy? He goes, everyone goes into a business or goes into something because they're very excited about it. It's never going to fail. There's never going to be things that go wrong. He goes, the most important part of any plan is an exit strategy. And everyone focuses on the entrance strategy, the day-to-day strategies, all of these things. But the most important is the exit strategy. And those are some things that we've discussed here. It's never too early to plan an exit strategy, even if things are going well, because that component is just as important, and you should be just as excited about that as you are on the entrance and the building of going into the business or the day-to-day operations. So that was one little personal.
And when to pull your chute, right? Do you wait till you're 100 foot over the ground and pull your chute and get squished like a grape? Or do you have a certain point in time where you've bled it off, or you know it's not going to be that thing that you want to pass on, and just go ahead and you liquidate and sell, right? And that's a hard discussion to have, but you should have it, right? At what point is enough enough? And do you and at what point have you gone so far that you've taken everything you could have given to your family and the next generations away, right? And we have those discussions a lot of times, like at what point is enough enough? And you want to fight the good fight. It's always gonna be a better year next year. Like I grew up in ranching. It's always gonna be the case. But I have a 40,000 cow farming operation, 40,000 beef cows. 2 guys own the home thing. They got great kids. They're coming up, and every year they have a discussion. At what point do we bleed off, and we say, we're protecting. This is what we're protecting for everybody else going forward. So that's a hard discussion to have, right? Because nobody here's a quitter, but it's not really quitting. It's just being strategic, right? So, all right. So I'll go ahead and end the panel. I'll be the popular guy. Let everybody get back home on a Friday. But thanks again.